So let me just kind of walk through a couple of things here. You know, first of all, there we go. So these questions are a little bit rhetorical, right? But is grad school stressful? And I think probably the fact that you guys are in on this seminar, where you probably say, yeah, it probably is pretty stressful. And the other stressors in your life, take a holiday until you graduate. You know, there's your family demands and work demands and life demands, so they kind of put themselves on hold while you're in grad school, so they, you know, so they can go through school as stress-free as possible. Well, that doesn't happen either, right? And then does grad school stress affect other areas of your life, especially relationships? And they do, right? You know, stress is stress, and it affects all of us. It affects our relationships. It's cumulative. It comes from many sources, and so we try to manage that as best we can. But there are some things we can do that are helpful. And stress rises and falls in life, and so we do try to manage as best we can. So tonight, what I want to do is just give you some ways to think about stress, and also maybe some ways to help reduce some of it and try to manage it. And it certainly, there's not a magic pill, and it certainly it does take some work and effort on your part. So as we go along, again, feel free to make comments or ask questions as we get into this. So I want to talk about this idea of this diathesis stress model. This is something I cover in my class in our program here. And think about this idea of a diathesis as your vulnerability to mental disorders. It's more of an inability to resist or to cope with stress. And this comes about partly because of your personality style. It's kind of, you're born with this personality style, but also it's partly behaviors that you've learned in your families and what you learned growing up. So think of resistance or diathesis as, you know, a good example would be, how many of you are susceptible to allergies during the springtime? You know, so springtime rolls around, and probably some of you are just highly allergic to pollen and things like that, and you just pay the price during March, April, and May because of, you know, all the allergens in the air. And yet some people, it doesn't seem to bother. My wife has trouble with allergies. I would say she probably has a moderate reaction to it. I can walk through a dust storm or a pollen storm or whatever it may be and just be covered in yellow pollen and hardly even sneeze. So that's just sort of our predisposition to that. And your ability to resist stress is partly that way as well. If you have brothers or sisters, or if you're a parent, you have children, you know that early on, siblings or children have different personality styles. And it's not like parents wake up one day and decide they're going to make one child one way and make the other child another. It's sort of a predisposition we're born with. And it's more about your temperament. Some people have a very easygoing, mild-mannered, laid-back temperament, and they've always been that way. Things just kind of roll off their backs, and they just kind of manage. And other people, though, are much more prone to stress. They tend to have quick tempers. They tend to be easily frustrated. They just seem to be bothered by little things more so than other people are. So a lot of that has to do with the temperament that you're born with. But also, you learn how to cope in your family. Some families do a really nice job of teaching their children how to manage stress. There's a lot of cooperation, a lot of communication, dialogue. There's a partnership there. These families learn how to play together. They support each other during difficult times. So they learn different strategies to cope. And so those families tend to be pretty healthy. But then there's other families where it's pretty chaotic, where the way that they cope is through yelling, fighting, maybe even ignoring, or we can use drugs or alcohol to cope. So what we'll find then is that our coping ability is sort of a combination of our temperament and a combination of what we learned growing up in our families. So all of us sort of have a different range of coping abilities, and I want to look at that in a little bit more detail. Now, obviously, stress is anything in our life that causes a significant change in what we call our homeostasis, our ability just to be at rest. Stress can be a good thing. It motivates us to act, but certainly stress can be overwhelming and certainly can be very problematic for us. So when you think about coping and interaction, I've got this little graph here, and you'll see on one side, you'll see coping ability. And that's a continuum. So you have a high coping ability. And so if you have someone who you have a very laid back, easygoing temperament, and you were fortunate to be in a family where you learned how to cope, you learned how to deal with coping in very effective ways, then you could be someone who has a very high ability to cope. Whereas you may be someone on the lower end of the continuum where maybe your temperament is a little bit more towards being easily frustrated, maybe quick temper, things like that. You're bothered by little things. And you also, unfortunately, you grow up in a family where you didn't really learn how to cope with stress very well, and maybe you learned some bad habits. So that can kind of give you a double whammy to where you're sort of at the bottom of the coping scale there. So all of us are somewhere in between high and low on this ability to cope. And then on the right-hand side, you have stress. And you know about stress, right? and stress kind of ebbs and flows for us. There are times in life when stress can be fairly low, fairly manageable. And then there's times when it increases and gets higher and higher and higher. And so if you take two people, so you take Karen on one hand, let's say Karen has a low disposition for, or low potential for coping. And during periods of low stress, as long as the stress level is below Karen's ability to manage, then Karen does okay. But what happens when stress begins? Let's say Karen's at a low level, but let's say stress level gets up above that to medium low or even a medium level of stress. Then maybe Karen begins to feel some of the effects of that. And so stress also has a physiological component to it. So how many of you are like neck and head, shoulder kind of reactors to stress? You know you're getting stressed because you start feeling tension in your neck, your shoulders. Any of you have that?
I see myself as like a physiological responder, you know?
Uh-huh. What about, now some people feel it neck and shoulders and all that. Some people feel it more in their stomach and digestive tract. Sometimes they feel like, I'm just not hungry anymore. I have a little bit of an upset stomach, something like that. Some people even react that way.
I am certainly in the latter. Whenever I get stressed, I do feel it in my stomach.
Yeah.
Well, I tend to, when I get stressed, I get aggravated easily.
Yeah.
And so I know I need to, just kind of calm down and
Yeah.
get to somewhere and get myself and, kind of recoup and
Yeah.
refresh on some things. But no, not physiological, I wouldn't say.
Okay. Now think about Karen. Stress is up there for a while. So let's say that this stress level stays over her ability to cope, and it's up there for several months now. So then what happens to Karen? If you've been in a period of a lot of stress for several months at a time, what do you notice begins to happen?
Does she start to break down?
Maybe. In what way?
Either not being able to cope anymore or maybe get sick.
Okay. We know that our physical health is in our ability to cope with physical illness ties to stress level.
I think there's a real physical and cognitive decline.
Okay.
On top of even if she's at a low ability to cope, I think stress over time further lowers that ability to cope as well.
Yeah. It gets exacerbated. One of the things that happens for people, let's say you're prone towards mood changes when you get stressed, then if this stress level stays up there above your ability to cope for an extended period of time, then you become susceptible to changes in mood. And so now you can start sliding into more depression. It doesn't mean you have full-blown clinical depression, but certainly you can feel depression for days on end, and things like that. You also, if someone's prone to anxiety, maybe they begin to have panic attacks. People begin to maybe drink more. So what happens is we sort of have our default mode, and we tend to slide into that sort of default mode. Angela, you said you kind of get irritable, and that irritability may exacerbate, or you may feel like there are just days you can't seem to calm down. So even if it's at a medium level there for Karen, it's over Karen's head, how's Deborah doing? If it's at a medium level.
Deborah looks like she's doing pretty good. Like she can probably handle the stress because her coping ability is a little bit better than Karen's.
Right. So if the stress level for Deborah stays lower than Deborah's ability to cope, then Deborah's probably doing all right. But here's Karen down there. Now Karen's probably struggling with sleep disturbance, appetite disturbance, things like that begin to take hold. And if this thing persists for a long period of time for Karen, then maybe Karen becomes vulnerable to physical disease. Our resistance and our immunity goes down, maybe developing ulcers, things like that. Also, maybe Karen becomes susceptible to mental disorders. So now maybe the depression can really get to a level where symptomology-wise, Karen might qualify for a diagnosis of major depression or some kind of anxiety type disorder. And so we can see then that our inability to manage stress well over time can have some significant repercussions for us. And as long as Deborah keeps her coping ability above her stress level, then Deborah's doing okay. Now, what happens at a high level of stress? Then what happens? What happens to Deborah when stress level gets up above Deborah's level of coping? So now Deborah begins to feel some of those effects, right? Not major effects yet, but certainly begins to feel stress. And poor Karen down there is just struggling, right? Karen could be overwhelmed to the point where now Karen probably can't function well and may have difficulty going to work or going to school, things like that. So those are, so this idea of coping ability and stress is just one model, a way of thinking about stress. And all of us have a certain level of coping, but there are times in our life when stress rises above. And certainly in grad school, in the time of, coronavirus and tensions in election and tensions in our nation, we have some pretty good levels of stress going on. But maybe the solution could be, what if we could kind of invert that and flip it? So what if we could bring some of the stress down, raise up some of our coping, so then at least we get our coping above where the level of stress is. And that's what I want to talk about tonight, is just some tips and some things that might can help you flip the stress there. And these things will probably, for most of you, these will be things you've heard, and these will be things you've seen at one time or another. Maybe you even engage in some of these practices. So that's the goal tonight, is just to give you some reminders, perhaps, maybe, and you'll hear some new things you haven't thought about before. So some of the short-term effects of stress, again, these probably aren't too surprising. Emotionally, we tend to have anxiety, we worry. Some people, even a loss of pleasure, that things that used to be fun aren't fun anymore. And perhaps mood becomes depressed. And this can happen in the short term. Anger, irritability, frustration. So those are some quick things that can rise up on us. And the physical reactions, what happens physically is that the body sees this. You know, you've heard the fight or flight phenomenon, the sympathetic nervous system, where when we feel threat, then our body mobilizes for action. And so we have cortisol and adrenaline and things like that begin to mobilize us to respond. And we sort of get that in a mini kind of a way with stress. And if it persists day in, day out, then our body never really gets a chance to calm back down. It kind of stays at this level of a little bit of alertness physiologically. And that's when we begin to feel some of those reactions. Some people have appetite changes, eat too much or eat too little. I'm sort of I know when I start to get stressed, because I'm a comfort eater, and I like coffee, and I like semi-sweet things, not super sweet things, but semi-sweet things, but certainly nothing healthy. So I can tell when I start to feel a little bit of stress, because I want a cup of coffee and I want to munch on something, which is typically not that healthy. So you have GI disturbances, sleep changes. Some people wake up. I'll wake up, if things get too much for me, I'll find that I'll sleep for 2 or 3 hours, and I'll wake up, and then I'm able to go back to sleep, but it certainly wakes me up sometimes in the middle of the night. But we can have fatigue, high blood pressure, and so on. Cognitive reactions, now you have poor concentration or attention span. And you guys probably noticed that if you've been stressed out and you've been trying to study, write papers, pay attention in class, pay attention to talks on stress management, right, at 7 o'clock at night. It's easy to get distracted. We lose our focus. And then you have behavioral reactions. Some people lose their temper. We don't listen to other people well. We get aggressive. We may blame others, withdraw, we distract. So those are some short-term kinds of things. So any surprises on that list? Anything that surprises you?
Not at all.
Okay. And then some of the long-term effects. Then, so now if stress levels stay above our coping for, we're talking about months or even years at a time, which can happen to people, then there are these long-term effects. We can have persistent high blood pressure, which leads to stroke, heart attack, especially as you get older. Major illnesses, cancers, things like that, ulcers, irritable bowel syndrome, even migraine headaches. So physically, it really takes a toll on us. And in mental disorders, we can have major depression, generalized anxiety disorder, panic attacks, substance abuse, eating disorders, even burnout. Burnout occurs when stress in a workplace or in some kind of environment stays really high for a long, long time, and we're not getting much satisfaction from the work or from school. You can get burned out on school, right? You guys have gone straight through, most of you, right, have gone straight through. You've gone through kindergarten all the way through high school seniors, and then you've gotten into undergraduate programs, and you've done well because now you're in graduate school, and now you're in grad school, and for a lot of you, you may start to feel like, you know what, I'm just kind of burned out on school. And hopefully you kind of get over the hump and can see that the end is in sight, but that's part of the feeling we get. I remember my doctoral program, after my second year, I'm thinking, I'm ready to be done. And some of you guys may be there already. I don't know. All right. So there's different kinds of coping. Different researchers look at coping in different ways. They kind of slice and dice it differently. This is one that's probably more common than others. The idea of emotion-focused coping versus problem-focused coping. We typically engage in both of those. But what we'll find is that for emotion-focused coping, in the short term, it can be okay. We need some emotion-focused coping, and we do that, and there's nothing wrong with it. The problem is that if we rely solely on that, or we do it too much, then it works against us. It's not healthy. And it really is, emotion-focused coping is pretty easy to do. It's almost like an automatic kind of default mode. It doesn't require a whole lot of effort or discipline on our part. We just kind of naturally do it. So for example, if I like to eat, that gives me some comfort. That's a pretty natural thing to do. And then doesn't take a whole lot of effort for me to do that when I get stressed out. And then the other thing about emotion-focused coping is that it typically doesn't change the stressor, doesn't do away with the stressor. It just gives us some temporary relief from it, and really nothing changes about it. Then we have problem-focused coping. Now, this is where we develop real specific intentional strategies. And the goal is to reduce stress where we can. So if stress is here, we try to get it to come down. We can try to address the stressor itself, or we can try new behaviors to manage the stress. We typically look at healthy ways to either raise our coping or to lower the stress level. And these tend to be more permanent kinds of longer term kinds of solutions. They do require some effort and some discipline and even some strategizing for us to implement these things. And what we'll find is that these are more effective in managing stress than these emotion-focused coping styles. So the key thought here is that this is a long game. And I think you guys know that. There's not any real good short-term, do it this week and your stress is gone. Stress management is the long game. You've got to put it into effect, and you've got to do it for a while. And really before you notice some change. So sort of analogy would be, suppose you love to go to Colorado and you think, man, Colorado is beautiful. I love going there. It's where I want to be. And so you get in your car and you leave Central Arkansas and you're driving and maybe you're by yourself, or and you can start, after you get past Clarksville and on over towards Alma, you can, you've been on the road an hour and a half, so you start getting a little bit road weary, and you start thinking, well, I'm waiting to get to Colorado, but trees aren't changing here. The terrain kind of looks the same. I don't really notice anything different. And so then maybe you're still rocking along, you're persisting, but then after a while, maybe after 3 or 4 hours, you realize, hey, I've kind of been distracted. I've been driving along, staying on course, but I've been listening to the radio. Maybe I've been talking on the phone. And I look around me and I'm in Oklahoma and the terrain's kind of changing a little bit. It's not Arkansas anymore. I see that the trees are a little bit shorter, a little bit scrubbier. And so you persist and you get into Kansas and you realize I am really not in Arkansas now, right? If you ever driven through Kansas to Colorado, it goes on forever. But pretty soon you begin to notice that I am in Kansas and I am on a road trip and things do look a little bit different. And then you begin to see if you've ever been through Kansas, you can see the outline of the mountains, especially when they're snow covered. You can kind of barely see them on the horizon. You think, oh, I see my end goal and I'm getting close. And so you begin to notice that things are changing. And stress management is kind of that way. If you begin to implement some things, at first it seems like it's just, I'm kind of doing the same thing and nothing is happening. But if you stay the course and keep doing it, pretty soon you begin to notice, you kind of catch yourself thinking, wow, I've actually been sleeping better. Or you know what, my nervous stomach has begun to calm down. I haven't really noticed that lately. So So it is a long game, so don't lose sight of that. So what about these emotion-focused coping things? Again, there are things that are generally unhealthy, and eating sweet food or sugars or fats, drinking alcohol or a lot of caffeine, or using drugs, whether prescribed or not, that you know, we can get into taking in some unhealthy things into our body. But also things like avoidance. It's easy sometimes when I get stressed out just to avoid, to go just procrastinate putting things off, or just to distract myself. Or I can clamp down and push things down and push things down, and then I explode, and then I push things down, and then I explode. So we can do some unhealthy kinds of emotion-focused coping, but some things can be healthy. And these things, remember, emotion-focused coping changes how we feel in the moment, and it can help us relax, but they don't change the situation. But they are helpful in the short term, and then we have to keep in mind that. So meditation and mindfulness, breathing and relaxation. Do any of you try these? Do any of you find these to be helpful for you?
Absolutely. Deep breathing and mindfulness is an absolute lifesaver, and I practice it every day. And once you start getting to the habit of deep breathing, you'll start doing it more naturally. You'll just automatically do it.
Yeah. So what kind of mindfulness? What do you do? What helps you in the mindfulness?
So as far as mindfulness goes, I try to do some grounding exercises. If I start feeling like I'm stressed, I really just slow down, work on the breathing, right?
Yeah.
Just kind of look around, see what's around me. Just really try to center in for like 5-10 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah. So it becomes almost automatic now.
It does. Well, I'm working on the automatic, but it certainly gets easier to do it more consistently, and to realize that I need to take a moment to do it if you do it more often.
Yeah. Do you find you catch yourself sooner as well of noticing when you're stressed?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's one of the things that as you begin to manage these things, you actually catch yourself. You're more aware of when you are becoming stressed, and the quicker you can catch yourself, the better these kinds of things are helpful. What about journaling? Anybody try journaling? Diary?
I'm actually doing that right now.
Okay. Why am I listening to this guy at 7 o'clock at night? I'm tired.
No, it's bad because you're like saying the unhealthy ones and the healthy. And I'm totally mixing both of those right now.
Good deal. You know, one thing about journaling, let me encourage you to think about journaling. I know that it is helpful for a lot of people, but try to get in the habit of ending your journal on a good note. So I know there can be rough days in your journaling. You think, oh man, today was just a horrible day. This happened. I'm really mad. I'm going to bed. Try to write the last statement and sort of kind of counter that and say, yes, but, you know, today's a bad day. Today's horrible, but, and see if you can't end it with something positive, some kind of affirmation, something to be thankful for, something for gratitude, something so that you have an uptick before you close the journal. And that'll help you to turn your thinking, help you turn the corner with that. That's a small trick, but people find that really to be helpful.
Thanks.
Exercising, and this is exercising for release, for relief. We'll talk about exercising here in terms of just managing stress in the long term, but sometimes just getting out and getting some energy out, you know. I'm a bike rider. I go bicycling, and when I'm really exercising for cycling, my goal is to go 30 or 40 miles, but there are times when I just need to burn around town somewhere or go out for a short ride and back just to get some energy out. And that kind of gives me sort of a release in that sense. And some people find that to be helpful. Also, just these planned, limited distractions. Now, distraction can be very unhealthy if that's all you do. If I'm avoiding and using that as avoidance all the time, that's not healthy. But if you plan for it, say, okay, I've got a paper to write, and I'm going to write for, it's now, 6 o'clock in the evening, I'm going to write till 8 o'clock. And at 8 o'clock, I'm going to, save everything and just get on my game for 30 minutes. Or, you sort of use that as a reward. I had that down there at the bottom. Or internet surfing or texting, whatever it may be. When you're engaged in a task, if you can plan those distractions and use them kind of as buffers along the way, that can be helpful. A lot of people find just prayer and worship. They find that faith is important to them, and prayer, worship music, those kinds of things are very important to them. And again, it's a healthy way of an emotion-focused kind of coping. But talking with other people too, sharing and talking, and sometimes you got to gripe about things, right? Sometimes I gotta have a pity party, and those things are okay to vent in a healthy way, get things out, just kind of lay them out there on the table. Those can be some good things. And as I said earlier, using reward system, work, do some things, and then get some kind of reward, some kind of a payoff. Any thoughts on that page? Anything that that you find is helpful for you that others might like? Okay. Uh-oh, what happened? It's not changing on me. There it goes. Nope. I lost my PowerPoint. Can you guys see that?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I don't know why it wouldn't change. Okay. So now we have problem-focused coping. There are times when you can actually, you can identify a stressor and maybe you can do some things about it to change it. For me, when I was on internship, I would have to drive from Jacksonville into North Little Rock to go to the VA for my internship, and traffic was horrible. And I just have always never really had a job where I had to drive in rush hour traffic, and I've been fortunate in that regard. So now here I am suddenly having to drive in rush hour traffic, and I didn't like it. And so I couldn't stop the traffic. I couldn't tell everybody, hey, Kevin Rowell gets to ride on the road from 7:15 to 7:45, and you guys can't be on the road, right? I can't do that. But I could get up earlier and go when traffic was lighter. It didn't feel so, stressed to get there when I had to. So you can change that. Sometimes people get into stress because of financial issues, and sometimes you can go to a financial advisor and restructure some of your debt and find some relief. So we're problem focused is saying, what is the source of my stress? And are there things I can do? Certainly we usually can't make a stressor completely go away, but maybe we can sort of mitigate the effects of it and lower some of that stress level. Time management. I mean, how many times you heard about time management? Right? I mean, that's, how do I manage my time? How do I structure my time? And that's difficult for some people. Getting organized, developing some structure. So I'm a pretty, if you see my office, I'm a pretty chaotic kind of office person. It's not exactly the neatest thing in the world. And I'll get down there to decluttering, that kind of goes along with some of this, but getting organized and decluttering, that helps reduce some stress. And here's one that's really important: developing routines and rhythms. Is it fair to say that graduate school disrupts routines and rhythms? For most of
1,000%.
Yeah. It's just hard to get a routine and a rhythm going. And we're built for rhythms. There's a lot of good research out there that shows that routine and rhythm is important to us. And in fact, the 7-day rhythm is a pretty important physical human cycle there. And certainly we know about 28-day cycles, but annual cycles. But rhythms are important to us, and graduate school just totally wrecks those, because demands come at different times and in different intensities, right? And so that's difficult in grad school, but certainly very helpful, very vital for us. Exercising for health. So as I mentioned, you can exercise for relief, just for tension reduction in the immediacy, but then exercise though if it's more routine and more structured. So any of you runners out there, regular runners or cyclists, weightlifters?
Yeah.
All no's for me.
Oh, is that Angela?
Yes, sir.
Wish I was.
Previously runner, now lifter.
Yeah. So when you were running, how much were you able to run? What was your routine?
I ran for UCA, so too much.
Okay. So pretty much dominant.
Yeah. 90 miles a week was a maximum.
Yeah. Do you miss it now?
I find that it helps to replace that activity with something else.
Yeah.
But as far as, getting up at 5 a.m. for 2 hours in the cold, no, I don't.
Yeah, you don't miss that part. Yeah, I'm sure you don't miss that. Well, and also the idea of running, you had to, right? You had demands on you.
I like that you're, pointing out doing it for health and like happiness rather than that definitely felt like a job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you can have, again, these planned limited distractions, prayer and worship, as we talked about before, sharing, counseling, all those things, they can become, they kind of walk the fence between emotion focused and problem focused. But one thing too is building a support group. And our program in our mental health counseling masters in our doctoral level program, we're very much a cohort-based program. We want students to come in and connect, and we find that that graduate school is much more sustainable when people connect in cohorts, and that's something we emphasize as a department. In fact, I was just talking to my second year class, just checking in with them a little while ago, and they were just saying that they feel like they're a very cohesive group, and that's been one of the main things that's helped them to make it through graduate school in a good way. So, and I don't know how your other programs are, and I'm not here to be critical of programs, but some programs people come in and maybe it's largely online. Maybe you come in at different points into the program, and it's hard to bond with a group of people, but we do need support. I do a lot of trauma work and done a lot of disaster work for the Red Cross, and do a lot of trauma work now with the refugees. And one of the biggest factors on how people manage and get through trauma is having good support systems. And we're wired for community. We're wired for companionship, and that's vital. So whatever you can do, if you can join clubs or just informally have a group of 2 or 3 or 4 students that you study together and, work out together, whatever it may be, certainly you'd find that would be very beneficial.
Dr. Rowell?
Yes.
Not to bogart, but I'm actually on an SGA committee, and that's like one of our aims is to kind of create like a grad school, more or less community, whether within departments or like what you were talking about. Would you be available to possibly meet to like discuss ideas? Because it sounds like you've done research or at least have experience.
Yeah, sure. I'll be happy to. Just email me. Let me know. And
I'll shoot you one.
You bet. Okay. I know we're getting along on time here. You know, you give professors an hour time limit. It's hard to get them to manage that, right? let me run through this. So I just want to say, if I had an essential coping plan for me, if I said, okay, what are just the basics? And this is just me to think about. One would be establish regular routines and rhythms. As I talked about, you know, a regular sleep cycle. If you can go to bed, let's say 11 o'clock is your bedtime and you need 8 hours, 11 to 7, if you can hold to that 30 minutes either side of that, you know, a little bit of leeway. If you can at all work through that kind of a rhythm, that's important. Eat meals at the same time. Try to get the same sleep and wake cycle. Secondly, create a buffer. Now, this is a small thing. It sounds big to some of you, but this thing actually can pay pretty big dividends. How many of you have trouble getting out of bed in the morning? You know, like alarm goes off, you hit snooze, alarm goes off, hit snooze, and then all of a sudden you're like, man, I got 15 minutes to get up, get coffee or whatever, and get showered, get dressed, and be out the door. And you hit the ground running, and the rest of the day, do you ever feel like you're catching up, or do you feel like you're kind of behind the rest of the day? But if you could wake up 30 or 45 minutes earlier, create a small buffer in there. Now, some of you thinking, oh my gosh, I can't imagine getting up 30 minutes or 45 minutes earlier. But if you could do that, and in that 30 or 45 minutes, just chill, listen to music, drink coffee, you know, look at internet, whatever it is that you can do just to relax, then ease into your morning routine, you know, get ready to go to school or work, whatever. You'll be amazed that that will sort of set you up so that you're not stressed out to begin with. It creates a buffer for you during the day. And also think about those mornings when you've only got a limited amount of time and something goes wrong. You know, the car doesn't start, or you lose your keys, or you lose something, you know, and it's like, oh man, you're really sunk. So buffer helps. Get decent exercise. I'm not talking about, you know, be a super runner, but get out there and exercise, you know, aerobics for 30, 45 minutes a week, walking. It can be walking, it can be weightlifting, yoga, just 3 or 4 times a week. It doesn't take much. Research shows that's one of the best things you can do. Have a buddy system if you need to have somebody to walk. One thing about bicycling is that there are days when it's cold, like, man, I don't want to ride. It's too cold today. And somebody will call me up, hey, we got to go. Don't be a weenie. You know, whatever it may be. And then develop a decent diet. Try to minimize alcohol, caffeine, sugar, fats, that kind of a thing. Try to at least get a B diet, okay? Doesn't have to be an A diet, but at least a B diet. And then try to engage with supportive people who are encouragers in groups of people. And I know that sounds like a lot, but these are things that you can begin working toward. And here's a key thought, that these activities take about 4 weeks to become sort of a normal routine for you, sort of a habit. And so you've got a semester break coming up. So maybe try 1 or 2 things during the Christmas break and see if you can't begin to implement some of these. So when spring rolls around, maybe you've got 1 or 2 things going that you haven't tried before. So going back to this Diathesis stress model, are there 2 or 3 activities that you can do to begin to raise your coping? And are there 2 or 3 things that you can do in terms of lowering your stress, and see if you can get this thing to flip? And maybe in the long run, it will pay off. All right, so questions. I know I've kind of blitzed through that last bit, but questions. Dr. Barlow.
Hi, Dr. Rowell. I'm sorry I was late getting here.
No, that's okay.
I appreciate your insights in what you're offering tonight. I don't know that I have a question.
Okay.
But folks can certainly ask a question verbally, or they can post a question in the Q&A.
Yeah. So you guys know everything you need to know, right?
Well, no, this may not be necessarily in line with, just maintaining stress, but I just have a problem coping when it's test time.
Yeah.
Like a week before a test, I cannot get over that,
Yeah.
just kind of that stressful period until after it's over and it's like, oh, what a relief.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it a secret to that, or that's just kind of the way I'm wired?
No, I would say that test anxiety is it's huge for a lot of people, and Angela, you made it through right as an undergrad. And so now, of course, this is your first semester in grad school. So you probably feel like some of the old fears kind of rising back up, right? You lose a little confidence because it's a new program. And,
right.
We enter these grad programs, we feel like we want to prove ourselves, right? And so that adds to some of the stress. I think, think back in your, what kind of study habits or what do you do in studying that works for you? For me, I'm a very visual learner, so I would write things down as I study, just short, cryptic things. And then I could go back and review them and just review sort of the key words and key phrases. And then I would mark a line through them as I became comfortable with it. Little pieces of short, structured activities will help you then. And if you get, because what you're doing, the little short things, you'll feel like you're making progress, and you are. And so try doing small things that you can do rather easily, like taking notes, rewriting notes. Do some kind of activity that gets you into the studying, and do chunks of it. And that'll help relieve some of the anxiety, because you feel like, hey, I'm doing something. I'm actually working on it. Certainly that helps. And of course, obviously, don't study the night before a test. Don't be frozen and stuck and worry about it that you procrastinate. Certainly start sooner rather than later. Others have thoughts on things that work for you?
Right. And that's what I found in undergrad. I was able to, because I'm a visual person as well. And so I write a lot because that's how I retain my information. But in grad school, I see it's so much information that if I try to write it down like I was used to, then I miss something. So I'm having to learn how to, like you said, just kind of put it in chunks. And so that's what I'm working around now.
I use keywords and key phrases and just as short as I could get it. And that would and then when it came to test time, it kind of unlocked or opened up more detailed information through those keywords. I found that to be helpful. But also one other thing, Angela, I had to do was after class, I would take notes in class, and then I would immediately go back to my apartment and write down what I had done that day in another notebook. And so the fact of doing it that same day helped me reinforce it. It didn't take that long. It didn't take too long to do that.
Okay, good. I'll try that.
Okay.
Dr. Rowell, the one thing I'm thinking about right now is there's 14 people on this seminar. 3 of them are us hosts. There's me, you, and Mackenzie, and 11 students.
Right.
So that's 11 students out of approximately like 1,500. Well, no, this is fall semester. So 1,700 graduate students. And yet I would expect a larger percentage would benefit from hearing this type of information. So how do you support people in recognizing the importance of addressing kind of this aspect of their lives as a graduate student?
So let me understand. So you're talking about for these 11 or just for those? No,
for the other 1,689 who are not here tonight, who I would think a large percentage would benefit. So like this group is taking that first step. Right. If they weren't already thinking about it, they are thinking about it now. So they've made a first step. Some folks, it's a 10th step. But how do you get people to take that first step and go, you know what, it is worth me stopping and breathing for 15 minutes or whatever, and not focusing on that assignment that's due tomorrow. So how do you get that first step?
Yeah. So one of the things we do, of course, we're in psychology and counseling, you'd at least hope we were able to recognize stress and stress management. Of course, we don't always do things well, but one of the things during our interviews, we even ask students, what do you do to manage stress? Because Angela, I don't know if you remember that, or Jacob, if you guys remember that, but that was one of the questions we asked, what do you do to manage stress? We'll talk about that. And then we also have a mandatory, for our first year group, we have a mandatory stress management seminar they have to do with us in February of every year. But we're in the business of this. So I would think if we can get faculty just to do some of these workshops. I did a workshop for OT. I've done a couple for OT departments. Some of their grad students have asked me to come over. So I think maybe, from the graduate school to the program chairs to say, hey, students may not think about this, but maybe you can help remind them that these resources are available.
So maybe from a faculty mentoring perspective, that if the faculty value it, then they'll support students in valuing these ideas.
Yeah, because we've all been grad students. We know how stressful it is, and we didn't always cope in the best way either. So, that's a good thought.
Yeah, I mean personally, I find myself as more of a binger. So I'll really work hard on a project. Like for instance, my thesis proposal was more or less written this weekend.
Yeah.
Whereas, I've had to do copious amounts of caffeine to complete that.
Yep.
And I don't know, what would you suggest for someone who finds that binging works well for them, but it's not in line with your healthy model?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the first step is just recognizing it. And then I think the other thing is to, and what helped me, because I was sort of a binger as an undergrad. And when you're a pretty bright person, you pick up things pretty well, then you can do that and get away with it for a while. But in grad school, you can't. And so that's when I learned to write things down, to do things in chunks ahead of time. And I found that getting that kind of organization going early on seemed to prompt me to sort of stay with it sooner rather than binge at the end. And also one thing that helps me is knowing when is my best time of the day. And I happen to be a morning person. This sounds weird, but I get up at 4 a.m. and have done that since I was 12 years old. And I can't tell you why. My grandfather did and I did it. But so I get up, and my most productive time of the day is 6 to 10 in the morning. And so what I do then, I set aside that time to do things that require a lot of focus,